Hello, everybody. This is Hal, and I'm with Bede. This is video number 11 in a series of videos that we've been making on Vedanta Psychology. So we've covered a lot of territory. We're getting into the final stretch now. I think we have 2 more videos to do. Is that right, Bede?
Yeah.
Okay. So how are you doing today, Bede, and what are we going to be talking about?
Okay. What we're going to be talking about is there's formally what is expressed is that karma yoga is performance of action with proper attitude.
Okay.
So what we're going to look at is we're going to look at what this actually means in a practical way. But we'll do some, in order to show the value of karma yoga, we have to kind of look at a fundamental basic fact, and that is that as a human being, as an individual living in the world, mainly my life has consisted of me being an unhappy person who is wanting.
Right.
And so what happens is that because I'm unhappy, now this is important, because I'm unhappy, anything that in life that I find makes me happy or I feel makes me happy, I develop an incredibly strong passion for, or I have what we call a binding desire because it binds me. But the binding desire only has strength and power because of the unhappiness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if I'm feeling like I'm an inferior, stupid person, I will be striving to be a superior, magnificent person. And if you come along and you say, Bede, you're just such a wonderful person, I'm going to really love you. I'm going to like you. If you say that if you say to me, I'm a miserable person, then I'm going to hate you, consciously or unconsciously, because the basis of my cognition is my binding desire.
And you're saying that the binding desire comes from some sense of lacking something, right?
Yeah, the desire is the unhappiness in the form of a desire.
Okay, right. So it's not just that out of the blue we think, oh, wouldn't that be nice? But it's actually, when it's a binding desire anyway,
Mm-hmm.
it's there's some kind of underlying unhappiness or sense of unfulfillment that drives us to want something.
Right, right. And then the history of our life is either what they say, feeling good about myself or feeling bad about myself. Because what happens is that when I satisfy the binding desire, I'll be going, oh yes, am I cool or am I cool? I'll be having the experience of being egoically inflated. I will have an experience of myself that I can describe. I'm such a magnificent person. I'm such a success right now. I can't believe it. Oh my God, I am so approved of now. This is just so delicious. I'm an approved of person. But notice it's self-objectification, isn't it? It's something I can describe. I take myself to be that, and I feel magnificent.
So you're saying that really all these desires, they come down to wanting to feel better about ourselves. That's not necessarily obvious.
No.
Okay. But what you're saying is that ultimately, when we want possessions, it's so that we feel like a wealthy person, or if we want fame, so we feel then we're a famous person, and so on. So if we're a wealthy person and a famous person, then we're, in some sense, we feel we're a good person. And that's all driven by some kind of underlying sense of something might be wrong with us, or some sense of inadequacy or lack.
It is actually this feeling good about myself in such a way that I'm egoically inflated is actually the unhappiness in that form.
It's a form of unhappiness in itself. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. The only reason I'm feeling good about myself is because I'm not feeling bad about myself. The only reason that it's so valuable is it protects me from the feeling of unhappiness. It's also a delusion in the sense that I'm taking myself to be my idea of myself. I am such a winner. I can't believe it.
But that comes from an underlying fear that I'm actually kind of a loser, right?
It is all based on the fact the only reason that it's so valuable is that I have a notion that I actually am a pathetic, inadequate, incomplete person.
Okay. Where does that come from?
Well, we're going to go into that. That comes from, as we have been talking about, not being myself fundamentally.
Okay.
Not knowing what I am, and because of that, I am being something other than I am.
Okay.
So I'm caught up in being, in terms of Vedanta, our fundamental problem, and this is very important, is that I don't know what it means to be myself. And because of that, I'm always being something else, like I'm being a winner, like I'm being a popular person and approved of. I'm being a loved person. I'm being a scumbag. I'm being hopeless. I'm being a loser. See, what my teacher said is that no matter what notion we have of ourselves, they're all erroneous notions. They are not ourselves. But hypnotically, we take all of these to be ourselves. So we are always constantly shifting. We're constantly shifting between an ego inflation sense of ourselves or an ego deflation sense of ourselves. And when we're feeling inflated, we want more of it. And when we're feeling deflated, we want the opposite of it. So we keep on going like around and around, like you were talking about last week, like a hamster on one of those treadmill things.
Yeah, hamster in a wheel, right. And I guess what you're saying is, Vedantically speaking, that really it's all coming from a fundamental self-ignorance, not knowing who we are. We mistake ourselves to be in some fashion or another limited beings, and that starts the whole kind of wheel in motion, right?
Yes, it does. Because we don't know what we are, we then we then make a mistake as to what we are, and then we live out that mistake. We're constantly living out what we are not.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's not okay, but I think it's clear. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so what we are being is an unhappy wanting person or an unhappy demanding person.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is that constantly in life, four things always happen. The first thing is we get what we want.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we get what we want, how do we feel about ourselves?
We feel good about ourselves.
No, we feel good about it. And sometimes we get more than what we expect, more than what we want. What do we feel like then, Hal?
And we really feel good about ourselves.
It's like this huge balloon that's being blown up, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But then also we get what we don't want. What happens then?
We feel deflated. We don't feel good about ourselves.
And sometimes we get the opposite of what we want.
Yeah, then we really feel bad. We feel victimized even sometimes.
Yes. So our whole psychology is this spectrum, isn't it, of ego inflation and ego deflation.
Yeah.
Our whole story of our life, whenever we take ourselves to be this wanter, and this wanter has a history. Is that true?
Yeah.
Myself as a wanter has a history.
Well, what do you mean has a history?
Well, you see, when you look back in your past and every experience you've had that's unpleasant, it's yourself as a wanter that's had those unpleasant experiences. You didn't want them.
Okay, I see what you mean.
You wanted something different.
Your personal story, so to speak.
That's right. It's all about wanting, because you see, what happens is when you've got something and you lose it, you've got sadnesses, haven't you? Experiences of sadness, loss.
Right.
You've got, because you've got stuff now, you might actually lose it. So you've got the experience of fear.
Mm-hmm.
People have hurt you and taken what you want, and now you hate them, and you've had the experience of hatred.
Yeah.
So, and this unhappiness is a driving force, and what happens is that it is constantly constantly appearing as a demanding wanting. I become a wanting person.
Yes.
Okay. Now, notice too that this takes us away from our self-wanting, because we're wanting something over there to make us happy.
Yeah, we seem to be completely dependent for our happiness on things that are out there, so to speak.
Yes. So that what happens in life, it becomes a life and death event, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To us. You see what I mean? So the meaning of our life, the basis of our cognition is, am I going to get what I want, or am I not?
Right.
Am I getting what I want, or am I getting what I don't want?
Yeah, that determines whether our story is a tragedy or a comedy.
But it doesn't really matter. They're both stories.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. You see, when you know how we talked about that the context determines the meaning?
Yeah.
When the context of our lives is our desires and aversions, this determines the meaning of how we see ourselves, the meaning of how we see other people, and what the world is like.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter what we do. It doesn't matter what we can try and rearrange. You see, let's say this wanter wants to become religiously free. Do you know what I mean? Or wants a spiritual experience. The problem is it's still the wanter. Then he tries to have a spiritual experience and goes, I'm a failure as a spiritual person.
Right. You mean we transpose the same thing onto even our sort of highest aspirations, even
So-called, yes.
our so-called spiritual aspirations.
Yes. Because we're enclosed in being a unhappy, wanting person.
Yeah, as long as you feel that you're lacking something and you need something to be happy, then you're caught in that trap, basically.
Yes, as long as you're lacking, you will be wanting.
Yeah.
Because that's the wanting is the lack in the form of that. Now, we're going to talk about a very important thing here. We're going to be talking about what Swami Dayananda says is that in order for us to be in a condition as an individual to understand the teaching, these binding desires, these demands, have to be neutralized.
Okay.
In other words, they can't be governing our life. Now, it's a very interesting thing. You can't just simply say, I'm not going to want these things.
Mm-hmm.
If I am in pain, I'm in some form of unhappiness, I cannot help but compulsively try and do something about it.
Right.
I've got no choice about that.
You're saying you can't just give up these desires as an act of will or something.
Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Now,
Excuse me, some people think that they can transcend desire, perhaps, by becoming ascetic or by willfully renouncing. You're saying that doesn't really address the root of the problem.
Right, because the root of the problem is that when I become happy and relaxed in myself, then and only then will I be released from the power of these binding desires.
Okay.
There's no choice about this.
Right.
Okay? Now, in our discussions, we've talked about the fact that as an individual, here I am, I'm this isolated individual. I'm a getter. I'm trying to get.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm trying to get, and the whole, and I'm hoping to get what I need and want from the world and from people.
Right.
And my whole relation to life is as a getter.
Yeah. Well, in the West, we think that's good. We call someone a go-getter. That's a compliment, isn't it?
Yes, Swami Dayananda says we're trained to be consumers. We consume, we consume goods, we consume approval, we get gimme.
And we're encouraged by our culture even to be consumers, aren't we?
We are, because we're told that if you use this type of soap, you'll be approved of because you won't smell. If you drive this car, you'll become a wonderfully good look in terms of the eyes of other people. If you attain certain status, then you'll find the wonderful sense of self-satisfaction. All the advertisers always promise a sense of self-satisfaction.
Right.
That's how they sell us.
Exactly.
Okay? Now, there's a very important thing here, is that, how we were talking about how that once we understand that the very presence of God or the presence of reality is always here.
Yeah.
And when we come into relationship with that presence of reality in the form of how it's appearing, in other words, our minds are filled up with the presence of the given, which is the presence of the giver.
Yeah.
We, as an unhappy, wanting person, in that very moment when we are abiding in that relation,
Yes.
an unhappy, wanting person disappears.
Right.
Now, isn't that interesting? We haven't fixed the wanting person. We haven't done any psychotherapy to fix the wanter so that it can get what it wants better. We've disappeared it.
Aha. Because it disappears in that vision or in that understanding that we are in the presence of reality, right?
Yes, that we find ourselves that when we are related to reality, by inviting it into our life, so it takes up all the room in our life, we find ourselves relaxed in ourselves as ourselves. As Puja Swamiji says a beautiful thing here, we relax in the lap of Ishvara. It's actually an attitude, it's a feeling. The difference is, this attitude is not born out of our psychological past. This is what's important. It is not born out of our psychological past as a wanter and a getter. It is not a modification of that at all. It is something, it is a shift to being something completely different.
Right. Okay. Yeah, no, it's interesting because even just talking about it, just hearing about it, even as we're speaking now, there can be a sense of when you hear that you are actually in relationship with, you are in the presence of the totality, then that provides a shift in relationship that actually has a different feeling tone.
Exactly. It's a new, how Puja Swamiji puts it, we find ourselves, because he says that we are our attitude. This is an attitude born out of the understanding of the presence of Ishvara, or the presence of reality.
Right. It's like the understanding maybe, that when it's been explained to you, supports this, but it's more than just, quote, intellectual understanding, as some people would say.
It is, that's right. How it is, you see, what happens is when my mind is filled up of what is actually here, the presence of what is here,
Yeah.
and the presence of what is here fills up my mind,
Mm-hmm.
I become to myself a conscious being related to the whole. That is not intellectual. And when I'm abiding in this fundamental relation, as Pujya Swamiji puts it,
Mm-hmm.
I find myself being relaxed.
Yeah.
As myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is very important because, and so I find myself being a conscious person. It's not that I become conscious.
Mm-hmm.
I'm practicing mindfulness here to be aware.
Right.
No, I discover myself as myself, being related to the whole, because I am conscious, because I'm full of reality.
Right. Even the consciousness itself is given.
Quite.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Quite. He has a beautiful phrase here. He says, being awake to the moment by being ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, we're not doing this being in the now business. We're appreciating a relation to the whole, which in that very appreciation, we find we're awake to the moment, inverted commas, in the now, but we're not trying to be in the now. We're not trying to do this relation to reality. We are abiding in this relation to the presence of God or the presence of reality.
Okay, that's an important distinction, because I think if you're trying to make yourself in the now or be aware in the now, then already you're coming from a position of something lacking, right?
You're being a wanter, you're being a spiritual wanter.
Right. So you're in a state that is not now, that is not aware, supposedly. Of course, that's not the case, but that's what you think. And you're trying to then make yourself something different, or achieve something that comes out of this basic sense of lack. So here, instead, there's a whole shift, really a whole shift of perspective, to seeing that you already, in a sense, embraced by reality.
Yes, and you are being yourself as a conscious person, and you're no longer being a wanting person.
Yeah, when you see you're in relationship, when you're in the lap sort of Ishvara, or you're being embraced by reality.
Yes.
Then you are a conscious person. You see
implicitly.
Yeah. That's automatic. That's just becomes self-evident.
That's a consequence of the relation.
Right. It's seen to be, it's kind of a self-evident consequence, so to speak. Right? I mean, in other words, you don't need to do anything to produce that.
Yes. You are abiding in the relation, right?
Yeah.
Because you've discovered a relation which is very good. You're abiding in it, but it is not a product of your will or your concocting or your hopes, or it's not the result of you as a wanting person. It's the result of you listening to a teacher and becoming alive to the fact, like what Swami Dayananda says, is that we must learn, we need to appreciate God as a fact. So this appreciation is not based on religious belief. It's not based on Indian philosophy. It's not based on psychology even. It is based on coming alive to appreciate the presence of reality as the presence of reality. And as you say, it's always embracing us as an individual, but until we appreciate that fact, it's of no value to us. But when we are in fact appreciating that fact right here, right now, as we are, we find ourselves with an attitude of we are relaxed in ourselves, as a conscious person.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
And this frees us from the immense burden and weight of all of our past as a wanting person, as the whole story of our life as a wanter, and all the pain and the suffering that's associated with that. Because it's not a modification of that. It's actually a shift from being what we are not to being more what we are.
Right. Okay.
We clear on this so far?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
I mean, one of the consequences of this, though, is that you know, what you think you are, or your body and your mind, your experience of your body and your mind, is also part of this whole reality, the presence of this reality.
Yes, and we're talking about ourselves because we're talking about karma yoga, ourselves as an individual.
Okay.
So there's a transformation of ourselves as an individual.
Right.
The individual becomes this attitude of being happy, relaxed in themselves as themselves. So because they're in relation to the whole, they're no longer isolated and isolated. And because they are happy in themselves, relaxed in themselves, they have right now, right here, as they are neutralized, that is any particular desire that happened to be going at the time.
Right. And well, they actually, and they know themselves to be part of the whole, right?
Yeah, part and related to the whole, yes. They know themselves to be related to the whole. And not only that, when we're like this, we actually enjoy, because there's a sense of well-being, we are being ourselves. They even call it a mini moksha, actually. We are being ourselves as an individual. We are being aware, and we are being full.
Right. So what you're saying is,
as an individual, this isn't the Satchitananda, the what the vision talks about. This is ourselves as an individual who is appreciating myself as a conscious individual being related to the whole. And I don't find myself, when I'm related to the whole, as wanting.
Yeah, okay. So this is, the distinction here is we're not talking about where we're heading ultimately in terms of the final moksha or liberation, of knowing oneself to, in fact, be the whole, and knowing the whole to be oneself. But rather, this is an intermediate step, but it's almost like a mini moksha, because just by knowing that one is in relation with the whole, that one is part of the whole, that one is in the presence of the totality of reality, and is in relationship with it as an individual, then a lot of suffering disappears right on the spot, mainly the suffering of alienation, isolation, and wanting, right?
Well, we disappear as that.
Yeah. Okay.
This is very important. This is not an intellectual thing. This is available to us. And once this attitude, when we're abiding in this attitude, this relaxed attitude of being relaxed in ourselves as ourselves, we're not thinking of Ishvara and thinking about this and that. We're just simply abiding in an attitude, an actual attitude, a relaxed, happy attitude that is born out of this vision.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to stress that, because we're not, you see, and unless we are being ourselves as a conscious individual, this is the person that the teaching is addressed to.
Yeah.
This is the person who can understand and appreciate the teaching. Myself as a wanter cannot appreciate the teaching of Vedanta. I'll turn it into another object where I'll be greedy. I hope to get this. I hope one day I'm going to get moksha. I'm going to add something more to me as a wanter. Now it's called moksha. Big mistake.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
But I know that you met once a man called Trungpa, I believe. He wrote a book called Spiritual Materialism, didn't he?
Yeah, Trungpa Rinpoche, Buddhist teacher. Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah.
Cutting through spiritual materialism.
Yes. He beautiful book. But anyway, now we've got
Mm-hmm.
And once we understand what this attitude is, and what I say by understand, we only understand this attitude by being this attitude, by the way. It's not like a thought.
Right. It's not a matter of intellectual study per se. I mean, one might study it, but the point of it is to be it, actually.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The individual is the attitude, Pooja Swamiji told me, because I was very interested in, because I said to him, I asked him, what do you mean by attitude? He says, attitude is the individual.
Mm-hmm.
So
the beautiful thing is that by talking about it or hearing about it, then one can begin to connect with this particular attitude.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
it's transformative of one's whole relationship with life and with oneself.
Yes. Another big, when we're abiding in this attitude, which is like a refuge, actually, it's a beautiful thing. It's it's the best therapy.
Mm-hmm.
because what happens is when we are in relation to the whole, we as a suffering individual disappear. This is the, you see, when I talk about Vedanta Psychology, which I do, right? And I would joke with Pooja Swamiji about this. It's not a psychological method, but it is the psychological impact. It's the basis of the psychological impact. You see, I'm a Western person, Hal. I'm not interested in religion. I'm not interested in religious theories. I'm not interested in Indian philosophy. I'm not even interested in psychology now.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm very interested in the psychological impact of the teaching of Vedanta on me as an individual. That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, that makes sense, Bede. And I think that, at least for a lot of Westerners, what you're saying is, whether they have thought it through or not, is probably where many of us are coming from. It's not that we really want to necessarily join a religion or adopt a philosophy or anything like that. Really, what we're looking for in Vedanta, and what we find in Vedanta when we begin to become familiar with it, is a way of changing our whole relationship to life and to ourselves that is much more fulfilling.
Yeah.
That makes us happy, basically.
Well, basically, my teacher, Atma Prakashananda, never pushed the religious thing at all. She unfolded a vision of what reality is. And she unfolded facts about my life as an individual in the world.
Yeah, and for people who are interested in the religious aspects of it and so forth, that's fine for them too. But I think what you're saying, and I find that to be the case for me as well, is that for those of us who are even quite secularized Westerners, that's not an obstacle. And in some ways, that could help us look at this wonderful teaching in a very fresh and pragmatic way, because we're not doing it as part of to become part of a group or a religion or anything like that. We're really approaching this as a way to make ourselves happy, basically.
Yeah. The basis of Vedanta is not religious belief.
Mm-hmm.
It is the appreciation of reality as it is.
Right.
And abiding in that appreciation. It's what formally in our language we would say it's an epistemological method.
Okay.
It's to do with knowing. And I, like most Western people, I don't have any religious sentiments as such. However, I understand that when we talk about appreciating God as a fact, we could say that that's truly religious, but its basis isn't religious belief.
Yeah, I mean, it's religion in the you know, maybe original etymological sense of joining, of union,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But not in the social historical sense of joining a particular religion.
Right.
Or
Okay, so now are we clear on the fact that when we are living in relation to the whole, when we're abiding in this attitude, and that doesn't mean we're thinking about God or thinking about religion, we're just simply relaxed in ourselves, as ourselves, right? Related to the whole, it's a living relation, right? Are we clear on the fact that this lifts us, this abiding in this attitude lifts us out of being a wanter and all of that whole story of getting and losing and attaining and all of that stuff?
Yeah.
And the important point here is that when being ourselves becomes our pleasure, our mind tends to go towards that anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not like, I must do this. When we are being ourselves, and because being ourselves, which is right here, right now, as we are, it takes up all the room. It tends to free us from catastrophic expectations and hopes about the future, or regrets and pains of the past.
Yeah, right. And basically we see that when we forget this, if we understand this, if we get this, when we forget it, we begin to sink into a sense of unhappiness and alienation,
Right.
and reinvoking this relationship by remembering it, by abiding in it, then we, in a sense, transcend that unhappiness and alienation, or it disappears, and we find ourselves again in a vital, awake, living, and happy relationship with life.
Now we're getting to the point here. I'm glad you said this. What we want to do is we want to establish this relation as a lifestyle.
Okay.
And this is the beauty of Karma Yoga. Now, then this is precisely what I wanted to go over today.
Okay.
You see, and I'll do it like my teacher does it. She says that when you look at life, there's no such thing as non-doing. We are constantly having to perform actions.
Right.
And we're always performing actions.
Yeah, we can't get away.
If I'm lying down, I'm performing an action. If I'm talking to you, I'm performing an action. If I'm going to the toilet, I'm performing an action. If I'm washing my teeth, I'm performing an action. If I'm cleaning my teeth, I'm performing an action. I'm always performing an action.
Okay.
The substrate, the basis of my life as an individual in the act of living, the verb, is the performance of action. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, if you really look at it, I mean, even if you are just sitting still, you're breathing, your heart is beating, your body is doing all sorts of self-regulating activities.
And you're sitting down, so you're performing the action of sitting down.
You're sitting down, right? Okay.
So is there any moment, Hal, when you're not performing an action? I just want to get this clear first as a basis of something.
No, and I guess even when you're sleeping, right?
Yeah, just that you're not aware that you're performing the action. Okay?
Yeah.
Now this is where, you talked about, forgetting. Now this is you're going to love this, Hal. This is the most wonderful thing. What we do is we have performance of action here, don't we?
Yeah.
Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to commit to performing the action with this attitude that's born of the vision. So what we're bringing together is we're bringing together the performing of action with proper attitude.
Okay.
Now, proper means, taken from the Latin property, ownership. Proper attitude is the attitude that belongs to this vision of reality or of Ishvara.
Okay.
So we're going to perform, so we have performance of action with proper attitude. Now, this is a very interesting thing, how when I was in India, every morning I would go for a walk, which was a performance of an action, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I would just simply do it with proper attitude. In other words, I would just simply abide in this attitude of being relaxed in myself, as I walked along. And I become very familiar with this attitude.
Okay.
Now, so what happens here is this. This is where we can commit to a lifestyle called a lifestyle of karma yoga. So what happens is we find ourselves, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain this phenomenologically, which means phenomenological is a description, just describing, right?
Okay.
Now, for example, the other day I was driving down the motorway, and I was performing this action of driving with proper attitude. I was relaxed in myself, as myself, driving along. The next moment, I went, oh, for God's sake, all this bloody traffic. And suddenly, I was no longer performing action with proper attitude. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand.
I was caught in being a suffering individual, a wanter.
Yeah.
Wanting the world to be different. And this world was no longer the presence or the functioning of Ishvara in the form of order. This world was just a whole lot of cars that were preventing me from traveling the way I wanted.
Yeah, that's very easy to relate to.
But then suddenly I saw it and I just simply shifted back.
Okay.
The moment I shifted back to myself being relaxed in myself as myself, which is this attitude, the suffering person who was upset about the cars, guess what happened to him?
He was gone.
He was gone. And what about all these bloody cars?
They're just the presence of reality.
That's right. They're just in the form of cars.
Exactly.
Now, it's a very interesting thing is that Puja Swamiji is very interested in bringing in, within the individual, there's a fundamental rupture between myself as thinker and myself as doer. Have you heard him talk about that?
I don't think I've actually heard him talk about that.
Okay, so what happens is that, have you ever been doing the dishes and you're daydreaming?
Sure.
So there's you as a thinker, and split off from you as a doer.
Okay.
Now, the moment you come back and you perform washing dishes with proper attitude, what happens to that fundamental split?
It's not there.
It's just not there. And so what happens is there's a unity of mind and body, isn't there?
I see. Yeah.
There's a unity of myself as a thinker and myself as a doer. I am together as a person.
Okay, you're a together person.
I'm together as a person, yes.
Yes, you're together as a person, and you're a together person. What's interesting is that this is not because you're trying to be conscious of what you're doing.
Absolutely not.
you're doing. You're not trying to take the mind over here and then the body here and force them together. No, it comes naturally from having this kind of attitude of being in relation with the whole, with reality.
When I'm performing the action with proper attitude, I am together.
You are together. You don't need to make yourself together.
Quite.
Okay.
And it's in the very act of karma yoga. It's not like I'm going to do karma yoga so I'm going to get something.
Right.
In the very act of karma yoga, there is that unity of mind and body.
There is that unity and there's some kind of fulfillment in a sense.
There's a sense of wholeness, exactly.
Right.
Now, because it's very important that, because as an individual, I'm ruptured in myself.
Right.
Now, what Pujya Swamiji says, this has to be resolved. If I think that I can understand the ultimate vision of Vedanta while I'm fragmented in myself, split in myself, that's delusional.
I see. Okay.
So it's a beautiful practice. See, what happens is, when you do this, so what happens is you're going to commit to living a life of karma yoga. Okay? So we're going to describe it. Okay, so here I am, I'm lying in bed and I find myself waking up. But because I'm committed to performing action with proper attitude, here I am, what action am I performing? I'm lying down in bed. So I'm just simply lying down in bed with proper attitude. I just shift into being relaxed in myself as myself while I'm lying in bed. And what's happening is I'm letting things be. It's very nice. Then I get up and I'm walking from the bedroom to the bathroom. Now, even that walking, so that I am performing action with proper attitude. Okay, so this is where daily life becomes a spiritual practice. This is magnificent. This is unbelievable, really. Because all of the spiritual books that I read and all this stuff about being in the now and being conscious and all that stuff, I tried all that. That's why all I relate to now is the teaching of my teacher, Swami Atma Prakashananda and Dayananda. I'm not interested in other things. I'm interested in the traditional teaching. I'm not interested in all these spiritual newfangled ideas. So you head to the bathroom. You go to the toilet. You're performing action with proper attitude. You then have a shower. You're performing action with proper attitude. Then you notice that suddenly, you've gone off. And you can actually feel it. You can feel the fragmentation. Does that make sense? When you as a thinker and you as a doer become separated. Do you know what I mean? You can actually recognize it. Whoa, back again. Washing yourself. With proper attitude.
Mm-hmm.
Does this make sense? So you see, this attitude is the vision embodied as an individual. Does that make sense? It's the vision embodied. It's not thought about. It's the vision being lived. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Mm-hmm.
And then you get out of the shower, and then you clean your teeth. But you're not being a getter now, are you? You're not being a wanter. You are being a devotee. You're appreciating your connection to the whole by being yourself and abiding in this attitude. Does this make sense, huh?
It completely makes sense, yeah.
And you see, and then what happens is things happen. And I can promise you this is going to happen. Things are going to be happening as you like them. You're going to get what you want. And there's nothing wrong with wanting. You're going to get what you want. You're going to get more than what you want. You're not going to get what you want. It's going to be opposite of what you want. Now, we can do nothing about the happenings in the world, can we?
No.
But when those happenings are a source, or when those happenings are giving you happiness or taking it away, you're in trouble, Hal.
Say that again?
When the happenings of the world are giving you happiness or taking it away, you are in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I understand.
And our whole life has been based on that.
Right.
I am a self-confessed wanter. I've lived my whole life as a wanter.
Yeah.
And I've eventually failed at it. It's a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
Now, but this,
Sounds a little like you're in AA here.
yes.
Hello, my name is Hal, and I'm a wanter. I'm a recovering wanter. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you see, the thing is that you see, what happens is the moment you find yourself being unhappy, that is
Yeah.
because you're being a wanter.
Right.
It means that you're struggling to get something. Your wife said something you don't like, so you're getting upset with her to try and do something.
Mm-hmm.
To fix yourself up by trying to control her. That's a good one. Never works, by the way. So what happens is...
You think you would know that by now, yeah.
Oh, yes. But by living a life of karma yoga, you remain the same. And also because, you see, when you're happy in yourself, relaxed in yourself, as yourself, and then what it means is that happenings can't take that away from you or give it to you. In fact, they can't take away or give it to you because they've got nothing. It doesn't come from that. You see, this is the point. This sense of well-being does not come from the presence or absence of things.
Yeah.
That's why we can become relatively free of these when we are living a life of karma yoga, when we're abiding in this vision as a way of life.
Okay, good. And I see that, basically this idea of being committed to living in this vision, as well as the actual vision itself of seeing one's relationship with reality, with the totality, with the whole, as being what is actually happening all the time, that you are in relationship with reality, with the whole, or God, whatever you want to call
Yes.
that both of those are aspects of, in a certain sense, of a kind of a devotional attitude, right?
Yes,
it is devotional, even though that sounds a little religious, but it's not necessarily religious per se, but yet it is devotional.
Yes, we become devoted to staying in relation to the whole by abiding in the attitude that's born of the vision.
Exactly. And there is a kind of an appreciation for this vision and for the whole, basically, that's there when you are in that attitude, right?
Unless we are in relation to the presence of God, does that make sense? Unless we are living a life where we remain related to the whole,
mm-hmm.
we become alienated as an individual and we become fragmented within ourselves.
Right, and conversely, when we feel alienated and unhappy,
yes,
that's a surefire indicator that we have fallen out of that attitude of being in relation with the whole.
Now that is the whole point. This is why, by Pujya Swamiji said very clearly, and he, in the last year of his life when I was studying with him, there is no karma yoga without Ishvara.
Mm-hmm.
So without the appreciation of the reality of God as a fact to be appreciated, there is no karma yoga. This has to come first. This is why we have to get in front of a traditional teacher who unfolds the vision so that we can come alive to this fact. And then we can abide in the appreciation of that fact. And when we do, we find ourselves being relaxed in ourself as ourself. This is the attitude. This is our attitude as an individual. And then we commit. My teacher says we must commit to a life of karma yoga. Commit. So that what happens is, like when I'm walking down the stairs, you know what I mean? Whenever I just simply find myself, in other words, different from being a thinker and being a doer are split, I just come back. I just come back to abiding in this relation. And it's And what you find is the more you do it, the more you come back naturally to it. And the more you begin to understand what tranquility is that's not dependent on people and things. Which is very important, because if a teacher says to you, you are in fact the satisfaction you're seeking, as a wanter, you cannot accept that. It's just gobbledygook.
Yeah.
You must experience in relative form. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What we're going to have in absolute form. That's what Puja Swamiji says.
Okay.
And so it's extremely important to commit to living a life of karma yoga. It's extremely important to know what we're actually doing. This is what I wanted to have this conversation with about, particularly for new people. It's very important to know what we're doing. My teacher said we need to know what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we won't do it.
Yeah.
So,
And I just want to say something, that this idea of being committed to it, commitment is necessary, but commitment is not, in this case, something onerous, right? It's not a burden. Rather, it is a commitment in a certain way to leaving off your burden, the burden of separation and isolation, right?
Yes, well, you see, this is the thing. What my teacher says is that when we once devotion arises in us, it frees us from the passion for objects.
Mm-hmm.
So in the very act of practicing karma yoga, in the very act of practicing is the neutralization of desires.
Right.
It is being happy as an individual.
Yeah.
It's not, and as you said, it's not like I'm going to go through all of this stuff to get the goodies.
Right, because sometimes you see people have this idea, and I know we'll talk about this more later,
Yeah.
I think in the next talk when we talk about Dharma, but sometimes people have an idea that karma yoga means that you're committing yourself to doing all sorts of good deeds, whether you want to do them or not.
Yeah.
So while there is a place where good deeds or Dharma does come in.
We're going to go, good point, Hal.
Let me finish. I just want to say we're going to go into that more later, but what we're talking about here, though, is that this commitment is, again, it's a commitment to an attitude, to a relationship with life. That's actually a fulfilling relationship with life and a happy relationship with life.
Yeah.
It's not taking on an onerous commitment of doing all sorts of things you don't want to do. When you understand what it is, you want to do it because it brings a sense of fulfillment and happiness.
It's a raft. It's a refuge. This attitude is a raft. It's a refuge. When we abide in this attitude of what they call graceful acceptance, or whatever you want to call it, right? Do you know what I mean? Like, which is being relaxed in myself as myself and being a receiver as opposed to a resistor.
Mm-hmm.
Being a receiver, an open receiver to everything that is here, and being relaxed and being freed of the friction. It's so important, because this is the psychological transformation that we're all seeking. And it's right here. It's not some mystical weird thing. That when I am being myself, relaxed in myself, I'm no longer being an unhappy person. I'm no longer being a wanter.
Yeah.
And as you say, we've got more to say about this next time, the performance of action, because we want to know what governs that. That's true. But all I'm saying now is that unless we become committed to a life of karma yoga, we will not be together as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
We will not understand the teaching. You see, if I say, yeah, I know all about Vedanta, but I'm fighting with you, Hal, that's just not true. At any time I'm in friction or conflict, I am not being wise.
Right.
You see, we can have all sorts of wonderful ideas. I know all about this, but if you're unhappy, I mean, I once thought that I was this very smart fella. I thought I was very intelligent and very clever and all that stuff. And yet when I met my teacher, I was incredibly unhappy. And all she did was she addressed that unhappiness. She guided me out of my unhappiness. And she told me it's light. It's going to be light. It's not this, because I had this thing that, you've got to have this real, it's got to be really heavy. And I said to her, how can you be happy when the world is so miserable and people act badly to each other? How can you be happy? Does that make sense?
Yeah. What did she say to that?
And she said, and this fact changed my life. She said, I can promise you, Bede, that when you're unhappy, you will harm people. And looking back at my life, which has been often, I could quite easily say it's a tale told by an idiot. Do you mean? That unhappiness is true. That when you're unhappy, you harm people because you will do things compulsively. Does that make sense? Irrespective of whether it harms yourself or others because of the binding desires. And then I understood that being happy is extremely important. But what I got from her was that being happy is being yourself. It is not like an attribute. Not something I'm going to get. You see, I always wanted to get happiness, Hal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, going back, you're saying, and one thing is that I hear from that is that often we blame our unhappiness on the terrible things that are happening in the world. But in a certain sense, in our unhappiness, we tend to contribute to the terrible things that are happening in the world.
We will dramatize the very thing that we hate.
Yeah.
Because it's only when, if you notice that when you're happy in yourself as yourself, do you feel like fighting?
No.
Is there any enmity?
No. Yeah, and when you're happy,
because we find our slot.
Right. When you're happy in yourself, then there's a natural kind of generosity, giving, loving, friendliness, and all these positive qualities come naturally to one.
They start to shine in us, yes.
Yeah.
And so that the whole point in summing up is this: is that as human beings, we're always constantly performing actions. Is that right?
Yes.
What karma yoga does is that we keep on doing that. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to perform actions with proper attitude. And this lifts us out of our subjectivity.
Okay.
And we live objectively.
So that's clear because we're doing actions anyway. So now we're committing ourselves to do all those actions that we're doing anyway with a proper attitude, which is the karma yoga attitude.
And my teacher says this is converting action into a preparatory discipline.
Okay. That's why it's a yoga.
That's why it's a yoga.
Okay.
All right?
Very good. That's very clear.
Okay, so what we're going to do next time is we're going to go into the subject of performance and action and what has to govern those actions. Because, again, we don't want this rupture, do we? This split within ourselves between myself as a thinker and myself as a doer.
Right.
All right?
Okay, thank you very much, Bede.
Thank you, Hal. Bye-bye.
Great. Bye-bye.